Dean and I are going to do a giveaway. And if you stick with us and you watch this entire video, when you get to the end, we're going to tell you how to get something for free.
All right. Hello, folks. My name is Dean Cook. I currently publish under the name D.W. Cook. I'm an attorney here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And this is our effort to go, or at least from my perspective, to go over kind of our process in terms of getting stuff published or, that journey. And I'll let Josh explain better.
Well, my name is Josh Craven, and like Dean, I'm also an attorney. In fact, two of us have been friends for about 10 years now, and we met practicing. And through that, we also learned that we both like to write fiction. And we've had a writers group for several years. We've collaborated and helped each other through editing and proofreading. And one of the things that we've decided to do now is this YouTube channel, Dean and Josh Write Fiction. And in particular, this series, both Dean and I have written and self-published in the past. Dean is taking a run at landing an agent, and I've decided that for a novel that I've just completed that I'm currently revising, I'm going to try the traditional approach of landing an agent for that as well.
I think from my perspective, and maybe a little bit more than Josh, is the difficulty, I think, based on the content of what I want to write about, and a lot of things gets controversial or political, and I think that's gonna add in a difficulty to it. I don't want to overplay that point because I think that can become an excuse or a crutch, but I certainly think that's going to play into it from the standpoint of some of my writing.
I think that that's a fair assessment, because when you research agents and you look for agents that are representing people in the area that you write, you'll quickly find that there are trends. They want certain themes or books that are written from a certain protagonist point of view. And that's great. That's obviously based on what they've found to be most popular selling items. But not everyone has those point of views to write from in a credible way.
Or wants to write from that perspective, even.
Right. And so, based on your life experiences or the point of view that you want to write from or the message that you want to share, it can be difficult to find agents that are looking for that type of content. And I think it's true for both Dean and I that the things that we write about and the protagonist that we write from don't necessarily reflect what agents are always looking for. I don't think Dean and I are alone in this. I think there are a lot of people out there that write in areas that agents might not say that they're looking for. If you look up agents in Writer's Digest or online, in any of those sources, they're going to tell you what type of material they're looking for. And a lot of times you're going to see things that aren't going to be the perspective that you're writing from. And that's the case that Dean and I have encountered. And so I don't think we're alone. I think there's going to be a lot of other people out there that are in the same boat, that are trying to find an agent, but that they find that the stuff that they've written isn't what the agent says they're looking for. And so I think there'll be people like us that find value in our search and us sharing our experiences and what we find. Can you tell people a little bit about what you've published?
Sure. For full disclosure up front, everything I've published is self-published. I've published a novel, and it was a short novel about 50,000 words that was science fiction. I tend to write in the areas of science fiction, but I also go outside those areas a lot in order to be able to say what it is that I want to say. So there was that novel called Intermediates. And then I think I've put out self-published 2 short story collections, or short story / novelette collections. One of those was science fiction. And then the other one was basically a put together of my stuff that tends to get more political, or is definitely written from a more controversial standpoint or voice. I think that one was called Come and Read It. The other short story collection was called The Tower Scope and Other Stories, and those are those three are all available on Amazon. I've written 2 novels since then that I want to try and get agents for. One of those is historical fiction set post-Civil War period in East Texas area, basically during Reconstruction. Kind of tentatively called that one Reconstruction Reckoning, but I'm kind of tentative on that title. And then the second one is finished more recently, and that's in rough draft, called tentatively again, The Matriarchs. And it's also very political and definitely gets into controversial issues. And that one is science fiction with kind of time travel and dystopian elements in it.
I have self-published one novel called Hellbender, one compilation. It's a novel. It's in novel form now. It was originally written as 3 novellas. It's called Rogue 3 Joma Circle. And I have self-published a novella called Chasing the Wicked Flu, and a short story collection called For Better or For Worse. Also have another short story collection that the stories are complete, but I have not published that yet. And I may attempt to locate an agent for that as well, although it's more difficult to find an agent for collections of short stories than it is for novels. So I'm not sure if that would lend a ton of value, but it is more content that I could use to try to find an agent. What about any of the stuff that you had self-published previously? Did you attempt to get an agent for any of that?
No, and I didn't with any of those because I had pretty much read the statistics on getting agents, and it seemed pretty daunting to try and get an agent. And so I just went ahead and went with the self-publishing route because it was easy, basically.
So for some full disclosure on my part, for Hellbender, which was my first novel, I did try originally to go the traditional publishing route and to land an agent. I went to a writers conference here in the Dallas area. This was a couple of years ago. And I had a sit-down meeting with an agent, pitched to them my book. The agent requested that I send them the first 30 pages, and I did. I sent that to the agent. The agent read it. The agent then requested the full manuscript, and so I sent that to the agent. And then at that point, the agent declined representation. I also sent that query letter out to a handful of other agents, again, based on research. I sent that to other agents that seemed to be open to representing authors that wrote from more traditional perspectives. My book, Hellbender, is about a young white male in Texas in post-World War II, rural East Texas. There's a supernatural element. Most of my fiction is dark fiction, mainstream horror. I don't write anything graphic or anything too spectacular or gory. I do write mainstream horror, a more traditional 80s type horror was what I would call it. So I sent my manuscript out, or my query letter, and the first few pages, according to the agent's guidelines, whatever they wanted, I would send that out to a handful of agents. Most of the agents I didn't hear anything back from at all. Just throwing a pebble out into the void, no response whatsoever. A couple of the agents did get back to me and just say thanks, but no thanks.
That's pretty good that you even got a response at least.
Yeah, the one agent that I did have the sit down face to face with was the one that did request the full manuscript, but ultimately said they were not interested. So at that point, I decided to send my manuscript to an editor, hired a freelance editor, and had my manuscript thoroughly professionally edited, went through a couple of rewrites with that editor. And at that point, my choice was, do I want to go through the process of querying agents again, or do I just want to self-publish it? And I'd already gone down the agent query path and found that takes a lot of time for agents to look at what you send them and to get back to you. Just if you get a response at all, the turnaround time on that response is pretty lengthy. And at that point, having already done that once, and then having gone through rewrites and edits with a freelance professional editor, um, I was about a year or more out from having finished that manuscript, and so I felt like I needed to go ahead and self-publish it, and so I did. So this, what we're going through now, Dean and I are each going to be trying to find an agent to represent material that we have recently finished. This will be my second go around with trying to find an agent. So that's just a little bit of background on what I've gone through. I did not try to find an agent for either my novella or the short story collection that I've already self-published. So at this point, I have not queried any agents regarding my new material. But Dean, I think you said you have started the process of contacting agents.
Yeah, I've been trying to compile a list, and when we, at some point, I'll talk about the what I've done last week on trying to do that. And mostly, I'm in the phase of trying to just get together a list of them, and then I'm just going to kind of go through it assembly line style and send them out, and hopefully be able to create I've created a uniform query letter, and then each agent wants slightly different things in their query letters, but then maybe I can just kind of pull out bits and pieces and copy and paste together to tailor it to that particular agent. So that's kind of the process that I'm in right now.
How long is your query letter?
It's 3/4 of a page. I tried to keep it pretty short. Basically, it's introduce myself, give an elevator pitch of what the plot is about of the novel. This is Matriarchs, and then kind of give a brief biography, because most of them seem to want some kind of brief biography of yourself. And I try to play up the fact that I'm an attorney and I do some family law practice, and some of what I wrote in that novel is kind of based on or inspired by what I saw in the family law system or in the family law courts, where frankly, if you're male, you're gonna have more of an uphill battle. I mean, it's just default that the mom is going to get custody. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. I don't want to get too off into arguing political points of view, but there's definitely some defaults that in the court system that are working against a man, in terms of child custody and support and things like that. And so there was a certain amount of inspiration there in terms of the novel that I wrote about, which is a dystopian novel. And it's definitely, written from a male point of view and dealing with a sort of feminist dystopia type situation. So what I did is, okay, and I'll show you, okay, I took this book. I got this from the library. Oh, that's interesting. It shows it backwards. But at any rate, it's the Novel and Short Story Writers Market 2020. And it lists agents, basically. But one thing I didn't realize when I got it, I checked it at the library. I wasn't going to waste $30 or whatever it was, and I wouldn't recommend that anybody do that. About this much of it is actually literary agents. Let me see. Yeah, it's about that much that's actually literary agents. The rest of it, it's got some publishers and things like that, and that might be useful, but it's for my purposes, I'm working with that. So what I did is I went through it, and I noticed almost every single agent's in New York. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to start with agents that are not in New York. And so I went through it and just pulled out agents that were someplace other than New York. I found a few from Colorado. I found some from from Virginia. Some from Washington State. I found one from Dallas that I think I sent you that particular one. It had to be less than 20 that were not in New York. And the reason I did that was, once again, from the perspective I write, and maybe I'm being unfair to New York. I think there's a certain attitude in publishing in New York that it's going to be a real uphill battle from the perspective that I've written from with that novel. So I tried to compile a list of agents that were outside of New York, and I did that. But then I got it whittled down even more, because I could tell from reading the agents profile or, getting on their website and look at their website, that I didn't think they were going to be interested in what I was writing. And I try not to be too defeatist, and I try not to use the fact that I write from a perspective that is pretty non-mainstream against me, especially in science fiction. You'll find this perspective well represented in science fiction. If you read Robert Heinlein, his stuff is pretty much from a similar perspective that I'm writing from. So that's essentially what I've done, is I've compiled maybe half a dozen agents from outside of New York. And now I'm going to go back through this book and compile some from New York as well. Because I think you just got to, recognize that that's where your best bet is some agent in New York, because that's where most of them seem to be. And then once I get together, a list of 20 or so, I was just going to assembly line style start sending them out. And each one wants slightly different things in terms of their query letter and things like that. So I'll have to modify my query letter. But I've got a general form query letter that I've prepared already.
Right. And when you say assembly line style, you don't mean you're just going to send out generic materials. You're tailoring it to each agent's request, right?
Right. But I kind of wanted to go ahead and have my list of agents put together, so I'm not constantly having to go back and forth. And the way my mind works, it's just easier to do one thing and then move to the next phase and so on.
So you said that you already queried one agent. How long ago was that?
That was like this week, or maybe the week before. And that was one I found in Alexandria, Virginia. And I was like, hell, I'll give that a shot. And I think it was an online interface. It may have been email. I can't remember. That's another thing. I think I would have liked the olden days when you actually printed out and emailed out stuff, or I'm sorry, snail mailed out stuff rather than using email. But they're all email or online interfaces for submission now that I can see.
And I don't guess you've heard anything back from that agent?
No, and I think they said, most of them say something like 2 to 3 weeks minimum before they're even going to respond, if at all. And I think after a certain number of weeks, you can assume that they usually say after a certain number of weeks, you don't hear anything, you can just assume it's a rejection.
That's what I found as well. When I originally queried agents for my first novel, I kept a spreadsheet and I can look it up, but I want to say I queried maybe 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And of those, many of those I never heard back from. And I would say 80 to 90% of those I just never heard anything from. And a lot of the agents, as you mentioned, will just say that if you don't hear back from me, just assume that I'm not interested, which I don't really, I mean, if you don't, some of them tell you if you don't hear back from me, in a few weeks, assume I'm not interested. Some, it was just, if you don't hear back from me, assume I'm not interested. And I don't know if there's any time frame that was supposed to be implied along with that, but nevertheless, I never heard back from them.
Well, and I wanted to mention also that this is kind of going back to a little bit what we were talking about before in terms of especially with you and I both somewhat lean to the right politically. And I don't want it to make it sound like, I think you agree with me on this, that I'm trying to make my political views somehow an excuse for the fact that I'm not getting published. Because like I said, I think there is a market for the type of stuff we're writing. And I think it's just a matter of convincing an agent of that. And at the end of the day, at least I hope, they're more interested in making money than they are in advancing their pet their pet political view. And so, with that said, I think it's just going to be a numbers game. It's, you got to send out enough query letters and just keep plugging away at it.
I agree. And regardless of political views or protagonist perspective, or however you want to consider your writing style, it's still, regardless, you're still going to have a good story, a well-told story. You're still going to have compelling characters that people care about. You're still going to have a good writing style. You're going to have those things in order to connect to your audience. And that's going to be true regardless of who your protagonist is or what your viewpoint is when you're writing a story. And we acknowledge that. Neither of us are trying to say that, our political views are the only reason we couldn't land an agent. It's an uphill process for anyone, regardless.
Yeah.
It's a constant process of refining your craft and becoming a better storyteller and learning the trade. That's part of it as well. it just seems that there are more agent outlets if you're writing for, I mean, they're numerous. If you go and you look at the agents, you'll see that there's a great number of agents that will specifically say they're looking for fiction from marginalized protagonist point of view, or LGBTQ perspective, things that are very hot button issues socially that are going to generate some flashpoint interest and some immediate click responses, things of that nature. And so I think, given that Dean and I write from a little bit more conservative perspective, we both have a lot of traditional white male characters because that's what we associate with, although that's not exclusive. I'll say for both of us, and especially for Dean, our books are not limited to those characters in any way. It just happens to be that that's where our experience comes from, and that writing a genuine, believable character, it just comes more natural when you're writing from something that you've experienced, and it can come across as very disingenuous if you're trying to write from another character's perspective simply for the sake of getting published or trying to find an agent. If you're doing that, I think your audience and the agent is going to sniff that out. Yeah, they're going to sniff that out real quickly.
Yeah.
And it's going to come through in your writing. And
you've got to be yourself.
That's right. And so being yourself, writing what you know, writing what you feel and what you can relate to, and then still trying to find an agent that's interested in that. And again, it's not necessarily just to blame the agent. I assume that this is based on what the major publishing houses are finding sells well.
That's what I wonder is I'm assuming that type of fiction sells. I also don't know to what extent there's a hidden market out there that they're just not reaching. And I think you and I both kind of have this theory that there's a hidden market out there, or maybe it's a hope, that there's a hidden market out there of a certain, that there, especially, you and I both, we read, I think, a lot when we were teenagers, and it was certainly for me, it was a big part of my life to read novels. I'd like to think that there's a demographic out there of people, similar to me in that age group that would be interested in reading. But then I don't know, the statistics seem to show that like young white males aren't reading fiction anymore. So I don't know.
Well, and as you and I have discussed too, it's hard to figure out, are young white males not reading because they're not interested in reading, or is it because there's not material being published that caters to their interests?
It's a chicken or the egg kind of situation.
Right. What do you expect that you'll be doing in the next week in regards to your agent search?
I'm going to be working on compiling that list and, put together hopefully at least 20 or so names, and then I'm going to work on that this weekend actually, and then move from there into the actual, sending stuff out and submitting it, and, kind of honing my pitch in terms of, hopefully as I do more of that, sending out to agents, the query letters, that'll get better and better. But so next week is going to be sending out query letters.
Are you going to send out query letters in batches of 20, or are you just going to try to narrow down to about 20 and then wait and see what happens?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Am I going to continually be compiling a new list of 20 agents and sending those out? Or
right.
I'm going to have to go. I think I'm going to go back to the public library actually and try to find another writer's market book, because this one, I was surprised at how few there were actually in there. And like, you pay, I don't know, like this thing costs $30, and it's just like, it's a lot of fluff mostly. And I'm glad I did not pay for it. So I'm going to try and pull what I can out of that one. I'm hoping I can get at least 20 good ones out of that one. And then I'll probably go back to the public library sometime this weekend and try to find another one and pull, and just continually. Yeah. So I'll get together 20, I'll send them out, and then I'll get together another 20 and send them out. That's kind of my thinking at this point.
So another thing that I did when I was originally looking for an agent for Hellbender was I had subscribed to a couple of online resources like Duotrope. Duotrope is one that writers can subscribe to, and it'll tell you what markets are open, where you can submit to, and it'll help you keep track of your submissions. One of the things that they added a few years ago was an agents market. And so agents can list themselves on Duotrope, and they can tell what they're interested in, what type of material they're looking for to represent, things of that nature. I used that resource when I was looking for an agent last time to try to find agents that were interested in the type of manuscript that I was trying to sell. And the first thing that I found was that there were not a ton of agents that were looking for my type of protagonist or my type of story. The ones that were, I think they were inundated with submissions and query letters, because I don't think I heard back from a single agent that had listed themselves on Duotrope. So my thought is the writer's market, I don't know how many of the people in the writer's market are also listing themselves out on Duotrope, but I can say that the online resources, I think a lot of writers are engaged in that. And when an agent puts themselves out on a resource like Duotrope,
Yeah.
they just get flooded with people who are trying to find an agent.
It's like being
And
a somewhat attractive girl on some dating website. I'm sure they just get hit with tons of letters and emails.
yeah, I think that's probably a good analogy. And I never heard back from any of those. And I'm, by no means am I discouraging any viewer out there from trying to do that. Just know that you're going to be in a stack that's probably 6 inches thick when they go to read your stuff. But, that's another resource in addition to the Writer's Digest guide that Dean is currently using.
One thing you made me think of something else when you said the stack of, that you're hidden in the stack. Before I sent out that first one to that agent, and I was kind of thrashing around, and then I decided to do this kind of assembly line style, like I said, was when I sent it to that first agent, I looked at they wanted like the first, I want to say 20 pages. I looked at the first 20 pages of my manuscript and I went, okay, what I'm going to do is go back over this and edit this and really try to make that first 20 pages pop.
When we were growing up, agency was different than what agency is now. When we were younger, you would hear more about agents that would take on an author, and it was a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more nurturing and guiding. And I did not see any agents that were interested in doing that anymore. It seems that the agents now universally are looking for a well-polished product that's basically in final form that they can then immediately start trying to sell to publishing houses.
Right.
And so what Dean just said about making sure that that is polished and that it really pops, and especially that, that opening part of your book where you're either going to grab that reader or you're not, that goes back to having well-developed characters and having a well-written story. That's got to be done before you send it to an agent, because an agent, they don't have the time to read a whole manuscript. If it's not going to garner their interest immediately, then they're going to move on to the next one and find one that will. And that's part of it. You've got to do the work. And again, as Dean's mentioned before, we can't just go, hey, nobody wants to read our stuff because we're conservative white males. It's going to be a situation where, are they going to not read our stuff because it's not well written or because the story is not compelling? Those things still have to be there, but there's other aspects to it as well.
And I think there's somewhat of a tension there, especially when you're working a day job and you don't have, your time isn't unlimited, is like this science fiction novel I've written now. It's basically a rough draft, and I haven't gone back and really edited it that much, and it definitely would need that. But my attitude is also kind of like, I'm the kind of person that can sit there and be a perfectionist and constantly and never get things done and never get a product out there. And so right now like I said, I made this section that I'm submitting, well polished and well edited, but the rest of the novel would need additional editing, which, I'm going to do as time permits. But I wanted to go ahead and get a submission out there, or at least try to get some submissions out there and see what happens.
Yeah, there's nothing, nothing wrong with trying to see if there's at least some initial interest from an agent in the premise of the story while you're continuing to work on your manuscript.
Right, and that's kind of what I compromised on, I guess, basically, because I was like, well, I finished writing this in, I want to say August of 2019, and just because of everything else going on in my life, I just wasn't able to really sit down and work on revising and editing it very much. But I also kind of just want to, like you said, get something out there and see what happens.
Now, when you say you finished in August of 19, are you talking about Reconstruction Reckoning or the Matriarchs?
Oh, the Matriarchs, which is what I've been focusing on trying to sing out. The Matriarchs, I'm sorry, the historical fiction, the Reconstruction one, I need to get back to trying to send that out to agents too. I knew that was going to be way more of an uphill battle because unlike science fiction, I don't know how much of a market there's going to be for A, something that's historical fiction like that, and B, written from the perspective that I've written it from. And so I decided to focus more on the Matriarchs right now, just because I think it's, like I said, science fiction. I think there's a market there for the perspective that I'm writing from, because I've seen enough stuff like that, because I've read enough of it to know that there's probably a perspective there for that.
What are we currently reading? Because, if you didn't got time to read, you ain't got time to write type thing. So you always got to keep putting stuff into the brain so that it comes out on the paper.
I'm going to stay up front. And I don't think there's any dishonor in it. When I say reading, it's usually listening to an audiobook, just because of my time constraints. So I've been listening to a John Grisham audiobook called The King of Torts. It is just a brief synopsis. And Grisham does this with a lot of his novels. It's basically a lawyer on the lower end of the food chain, shall we say, when it comes to lawyers, who's not making a lot of money and kind of going nowhere with his life. He's a public defender, and he gets some information that allows him to immediately file a civil lawsuit against a drug manufacturer. And he kind of falls into the world of mass tort litigation and class action lawsuits against primarily drug manufacturers. And the first probably 2/3 of the book is basically him showing off the big world of mass tort litigation and all the money and the women and the private airplanes and all that kind of thing. And then probably the last third, which is what I'm getting into now, is kind of his chickens coming home to roost, I guess, a little bit, or he's getting a little bit of his comeuppance in terms of things are starting to unravel on him. He's done some things that were definitely ethically questionable at best, if not illegal, especially at the beginning of the novel. And those are starting to catch up with him. I don't know exactly how Grisham is going to resolve that. I suspect he'll resolve it with him having some money socked away and kind of quitting the law, which is what he seems to do in the most of his novels at the end. The character just kind of resolves their problems and maybe gets to keep some of their money and goes off to some island somewhere and retires, basically. And that tends to be what Grisham does. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with you and I both being attorneys. We've probably read quite a few Grisham novels. What do you think about Grisham's legal novels?
For the most part, I think the procedure is pretty accurate. There's some clear things where for purposes of poetic license for the plot, he definitely changes things. And I'm sure he was aware of it. Like in one of his novels, he has the character making a lot of ex parte communications with a judge. And I'm just reading it. I'm like, this would get you disbarred and get that judge probably, impeached or removed from the bench. Because like the Rainmaker especially, I was just like, he engaged in so many ex parte communications with the judge. It was just crazy. Now, maybe in real life that happens, and it probably does. I would never do that as an attorney, and I try to hold myself to a pretty high standard when it comes to those kinds of things. But he obviously did that for poetic license. So yeah, for the most part, his stuff is fairly accurate. He definitely, like I said, tends to deal with either the David and Goliath situation or some small down in his luck lawyer takes on the big evil corporation and, wins. Or the other one, which was like the firm, is, some lawyer basically sells his soul to, some big firm, and then he has to try and get out of it.
Do you have a favorite?
Probably The Rainmaker is my favorite, just because I could relate a lot to the main character, who's kind of on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of lawyers, and a lot of people probably don't realize that there's a top 10% of lawyers that make the big bucks, and then there's the other 90% that they're middle class, but they're certainly not flying around in private jets and living that kind of lifestyle. And I didn't get into legal thrillers really until after law school. I mean, I've mostly read science fiction before law school.
So, that's interesting. I've never read The Rainmaker. I've read several Grisham novels, but that's one that I never read. I think the first one that I ever read was The Chamber, which I really enjoyed. And I think a lot of his books tend to either be based on, I guess, things he's personally experienced while he's practicing law, or else things that are kind of ripped from the headlines. And The Chamber was about a guy who the movie had Gene Hackman in it. But,
I saw parts of the movie.
Yeah, the book was really good. It was about a guy from the South that was really racist and had bombed a church back in the 60s, a racially motivated crime. And I believe he had killed a little girl. And
I think that's right.
He was now on death row, about to go to the gas chamber. And so the book was about a distant relative of his. And from what I recall, I believe the relative found the guy pretty repulsive in his views.
That came across in the movie as well, I believe.
But was trying to save his life. And it was I have to admit, like, I don't agree with a lot of Grisham's political leanings, and those come through in his books. But that one was pretty good. It definitely gave me a little bit of a different perspective on the death penalty. Not one that I necessarily agree with, but it was a pretty good explanation, at least, of how the other side views the issue. I did find that one pretty interesting, and it's probably still my favorite Grisham book.
And the movie, one of the things I thought was interesting is the people kind of protesting or in support outside. And he had them, or in the movie at least, they were completely flipped. So you basically had people kind of on the left wing of side wanting to have this guy executed. And then you had, I guess, I don't know if it would be the people on the right wing side, but it was basically like the people that would normally be out there protesting the death penalty were kind of protesting in favor of yeah, let's execute this guy. And I thought that was an interesting kind of to have them flip that. And I don't know if that showed up in the novel or not, and it's good to get people out of there. I think writing along those lines, where you can kind of get people out of what their normal reaction politically or socially would be because of the circumstances, I think, there's good ground there for writing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My free item is a collection of short stories I wrote. It's called Come and Read It, and it's in my pen name, which is D.W. Cook. It's just my first two initials reversed. And it's a collection of 5 short stories. Some are science fiction, some are not. And it's definitely some of my more political stuff. So if you're coming at things from a somewhat right-wing perspective, then you might appreciate it. Although I will say, and I'm probably different from Josh in this perspective, I'm less socially conservative, and so don't expect that there's not sex or graphic type stuff like that in it, because there definitely is. So just be forewarned.
And so for me, my giveaway item is going to be my novella. It's called Chasing the Wicked Flu. It's a Western novella that I wrote earlier this year.
I really like that cover, by the way.
Yeah,
that's a good looking cover.
Yeah, thank you. The cover artist was Joe Orsack. He's done some comic book art in the past, and I hired him to do this drawing for me, and I thought it turned out really well. I really liked it. Chasing the Wicked Flu. It's a fictionalized account set in East Texas in 1885. It's about two fathers whose family has been impacted by the Wicked Flu, and which is being spread by one person in particular. And the two patriarchs and their children chase down the person who is spreading, or the gang who is spreading the Wicked Flu, and deliver justice and a cure for the Wicked Flu, old-fashioned Old West gunslinger style.
Well, let me ask you, and you can, if you don't, we can decide if we want to include this or not. Is that the pre-Amazon censored cover, or is that the one you had to change, or what? Didn't you have some kind of issue with that with Amazon?
No, I didn't have any issue with Amazon. They just wouldn't let me run the ad
Oh, okay.
because the ad feature, because the art features the gunfire on it.
Yeah,
They
that's
wouldn't
the
let
violence. Okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me run the ad, but they still let me sell it. Okay, so here's the giveaway that we're going to do. If you want a copy of Dean's book, come and read it, or potentially to get a copy of Chasing the Wicked Flu, we need you to subscribe and leave a comment. And this is going to be the number, it's only going to be for this episode. However many people we get that subscribe to our channel based on this first episode is how many books we're going to give away. And the time period for this is going to be the first week until episode number 2 comes out. You have 1 week from the time this episode airs to subscribe and leave a comment. At the end of that 7 days, however many subscriptions we have, that's how many books we're going to give away. And we're going to choose the people that we send the books to based on the people who leave comments. So if during the first week we have 10 subscribers and 10 comments, then every person who leaves a comment will get a book. If we have 10 subscribers and 15 comments, then we're going to randomly pick 10 people out of those 15 comments to receive a book. But again, the time period is going to be that first week from the time the first episode airs up until the time the second episode airs. Dean?
Yeah, that sounds about right. You'll probably hear, a lot of really quick talk at some point with the lawyer's disclaimer, but I think we're good. No, I'm just joking.
So let's talk about, real quick before we go, what are we going to talk about next week?
All right. Well, next week, I'm going to give a progress report on my agent submissions. I think that's going to help me a lot in terms of having a deadline. The other thing I want to do is go over my query letter, and I'll give us, I'll read it, and maybe you can throw out some commentary on what you think of it.
Sounds good. All right. So next week, I'm going to try to work on my elevator pitch and give people a little glimpse of my new novel and what that's about, and so they'll have an idea of what the product is that I'm going to be sending out to agents. And if you are interested in this, and you think you could get some value out of this, or at least are interested in watching the train wreck or something, then like and subscribe and see how we do each week. But we're going to continue to update you with what we're doing as far as looking for an agent, what we're sending out, who we're talking to, what kind of responses we're getting, how we're changing our approach or, our tactics, and just kind of seeing how things go. And hopefully, in the end, we're going to hone our skills and hone our product so that we get to the point to where we have agent representation and we can sell our manuscripts through a traditional publishing outlet. If that's something that interests you, or, if you're interested in watching, then like and subscribe and follow us. And, hopefully you get some value out of this. Dean?
Feel free to reach out to us. You can certainly find me online, probably just by Googling my name and, typing in Attorney Dallas, and you can reach out to me if you want to talk to me about anything.
Dean and I both have our books listed on Amazon. I'm under Josh Craven as author. And if you search Josh Craven Hellbender or Josh Craven Rogue 3 Joma Circle, either of those searches should pull up one of my books, and you can go from there and find my author page. And Dean, what are yours listed under?
Well, it's under D.W. Cook. If you can see that very well. on Amazon. I think some of the stuff's on Smashwords. I haven't done a very good job on Smashwords, but I tried to put some stuff there as well. And so, yeah, you would look there. I don't know if you type into Google like DW Cook, I doubt that's going to pull me up, but you could certainly, I think I have a web page called comeandreadit.com with a page set up there with some contact info on it. So you could probably reach me that way as well if you wanted to.
I also have a personal website. It's just www.joshcraven.com that people can go to. There's not a ton of content there, but it is my personal website, and it does have blog entries and updates of status on projects and things that have been published in the past. So you can find everything there as well. And lastly, if you have any comments or any advice for us, or just want to commiserate, feel free to leave a comment down below and just let us know what you think of the video, or what you think of the process, or what your experience has been in trying to find an agent. Maybe we can help each other out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Folks.
See you next week. Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. I can't work under these conditions.